All right, good morning. Today we're joined by a very special guest, Maxime Bernier, who is running for Prime Minister in Canada. You probably don't hear his name very often if you're looking in the at least the CBC, because they don't want this guy to have a chance of winning anything, it seems, in Canada. Is one of the few people who stood up against the COVID hysteria, I remember. And anyway, it's a real pleasure to have you here with us today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very pleased to be with you. As you can see, as in my car, it's easy. We are in an electoral campaign, and the election in Canada, as you may know, will be Monday, April 28th. And now today, I'm in Alberta.
Well, if you were Mark Carney, I think you'd be chauffeured around in a Rolls Royce, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Possible. It's possible. Well, so what is, well, Doug, go ahead first. I have a list of questions, but let's, Doug, go ahead and jump in.
Well, I used to live in Canada, in Vancouver, and I loved it. But that was 25 years ago, and Canada seems like a different country. So how do you account for the sharp turn to the left that Canada's taken? Anything in particular that makes you wonder what's going on? What is going on in Canada?
Yeah, thank you for asking. What is going on in Canada? As you may know, we have a lot of people and foreigners that are coming to our country with that mass immigration. Under Trudeau, actually last year, the population grew by 2.7%, and the average of the growth of the population in the Western countries last year was 0.5%. So our population grew 5 times more than the average of the Western countries. And what is important to say is 97% of that growth was coming from mass immigration. So now we can see in Canada the impact of mass immigration on our way of life. Our standard of living is going down. We have a housing crisis in this country. It's very expensive to buy a house for new young families. And at the same time, you know, all these people are not integrating into our society. And a lot of them are living in ghettos in Canada. So we need to end that. And the People's Party, we are a populist party, like a little bit in UK, Nigel Farage and the Reform Party over there. And our goal is to end mass immigration and having a moratorium on immigration as soon as possible.
Well, what are the chances that you're going to succeed in that, frankly? Because let me see if I've got the numbers right. You gave me some of the numbers, but I understand that there's roughly 1 million immigrants coming to Canada every year, almost all of them from third world countries.
Yes, you're right about that. You're right about that. Last year, we had 1.3 million foreigners, and the majority of them were coming from Asia, from Africa, and also from, India. And a lot of them are not speaking English or French, and it's very difficult for them to integrate into our society. But, you know, when we are importing third world people, our country will become a third world country. So it's very concerning what is happening here. And I'm looking what happened in France and in UK. I don't want our country to become, a country like a little bit the challenge that they have in UK about immigration.
Well, you're completely right. And the same thing is happening to the US, and also to Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. Do you think that this is a worldwide trend, or at least a trend throughout the Western world? Can it be turned around, do you think, or is it too late?
Yeah, it is coming from the UN. As you know, here in Canada, the federal government did sign the UN Compact on Migration. For the UN, migration is normal. If you are a citizen of Zimbabwe you must be able to be a citizen of Canada, a Canadian citizen. And, I don't agree with that. It must be a privilege to be a Canadian. But yes, the UN is pushing for more migration in Western countries. Look what happened in Germany and in UK and in France. And it's time in Canada to stop that. But, what is a little bit concerning is the two mainstream political parties, the Conservatives and the Liberals, are not speaking about that. And the election day will be April 28 in 2 weeks. For them, they're okay with mass immigration. When you have 70% of the population that is saying enough is enough with mass immigration, they are not listening to Canadians. They don't want to speak about that.
So,
Well, oh, go ahead, Matt. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, I was just to say, so Pierre is not opposed to this mass migration?
Pierre Poilievre said that it's okay to have 250,000 foreigners a year, plus international students, plus temporary foreign workers, plus refugees. That means about 1.5 million foreigners over 3 years. That is mass immigration. We are in the middle of a crisis. We cannot open our doors to more people right now. As you know, in Canada, we are a country of 40 million people. So more and more people, it is not sustainable for our society. And actually, what we must do also is to deport the illegals that we have in our country. We have about 500,000 of them. They are staying in Canada. When their permit has expired, they must be deported. But Poilievre and Carney are not speaking about that.
That doesn't sound very conservative.
No, it is not. What Poilievre is saying, actually, he said that we must build more houses to be able to have more foreigners coming to our country. That will solve the housing crisis that we have in our country. That the goal is, it's supply and demand. We need to stop the demand. We need to have that moratorium, and that will help to solve the housing crisis. But for Carney, the Liberal, they created that problem. They don't want to solve it. And for Poilievre, he's pandering to different ethnic communities in different ridings across the country to have their support. So their policies are not, in the best interest of our country.
So it seems like there's very little difference between Carney and Poilievre, really. In principle, very little difference.
On that subject, you're right. There's no difference there. As you know, like I said, 70% of the population agree with our position. But for Carney and Poilievre, their goal is to have to win seats in the big GTA near Toronto and near Vancouver, where the immigrants, 40% of our immigrants are going to these two big cities, Toronto and Vancouver. And there's a lot of seats over there. As you know, we have a parliamentary system, and for them, they are pandering to these ethnic communities in these ridings to be sure to win more seats. By doing that, like I said, they're not working for the general population.
Well, maybe the solution to this really is to is for provinces like, for instance, Alberta to secede from Canada.
Yeah, now here in Canada, you have a separatist movement in Alberta and also in my own province in Quebec because of mass immigration in Quebec. As you know, Quebec is the francophone part of the country, and Quebecers want to keep their language and protect their culture. But with mass immigration, they're coming to Montreal. A lot of them are not speaking French. And so because of that, the independentist political party at the provincial level in Quebec is ahead right now in the polls because of mass immigration. And in Alberta, people are fed up with the federal government telling them what to do or what not to do. And the most important for them, they want to be able to develop their own natural resources. But because of the Paris Accord and the regulations and legislations against the oil and gas industry, people in Alberta, and some of them, not the majority, but maybe around 15% of the population are looking for Alberta to be independent or maybe to be the 51st state. I'm a federalist. I believe in this country. I believe in Canada. I want to keep that country. The only way to do that is to withdraw from the Paris Accord, but the conservatives and the liberals are okay with that. The only way is to have a radical decentralization in Ottawa and giving more autonomy to Quebec and Alberta and every province in this country. That's the only way to keep this country united and prosperous.
Well, you know, I read the platform of the Parti Populaire, and it impresses me as very good. A lot of principles. I presume you are a libertarian. Am I correct?
Yes, you're right. On the economy, I believe in free markets. We are a populist party founded on the individual freedoms and personal responsibility, fairness, and respect. These are our four principles in line with our policies. And yes, I want to have a smarter government. I want people to have more freedom. And I was, during the COVID hysteria, I was the only leader of a national party to fight for freedom of choice with an informed consent. Yes, our challenge in Canada is the federal government, the big fat government in Ottawa that is telling provinces what to do in provincial exclusive jurisdictions and, interfering in our individual life with more and more regulation. So, yeah, we funded the People's Party based on these principles. And you can say the People's Party is a classical liberal party, a free market party, fighting for conservative family values.
That's fantastic. Now, what are your chances of winning or getting a large number of votes?
Yeah, here in Canada right now, when they're doing pollings, they're not they're not speaking about us. Our name is not there when they're doing pollings.
They don't even ask, right? They don't even ask about your.
They didn't ask. No, they don't ask. They said others political party. So it's very difficult to know if we are at 10%, 20%, or 5%. But what I can tell you is that the last election, we had 5% of the vote. And it's a little bit like the Reform Party in UK. We are growing, but the mainstream media is canceling us. That's why I'm doing a lot of podcasts, and they don't want us. Actually, today, they will have their first leaders debate on TV. But for us, for the People's Party, they created a new criteria to exclude us of the debates. I was supposed to participate, but at the last minute, they changed their criteria, and we won't be able to participate. But answering your questions, I'm traveling across the country. I can feel the momentum. People are fed up, and they're ready to look to a real alternative. I believe that the People's Party can be a big surprise at these elections, like the Reform Party in UK was during the last general election over there.
Yeah, maybe they don't want you participating in the debate or in the mainstream media because you plan to cut their federal budget, don't you? Isn't that part of the plan?
Yeah, absolutely. As you may know, in Canada, the federal government is giving subsidies to the mainstream media up to $2 billion. And, we want the media to be independent. I don't want the media to be dependent on the government. We want a real independent mainstream media. That's why we need to do that. And if, they're not able to be profitable, it's okay. They will go bankrupt. So for us, these mainstream media in Canada are very leftist. And actually, the challenge that we have, contrary to the US, we don't have a Fox News, for example. We have Radio Canada in French, CTV in English, CBC, but they're all leftist journalists.
You know, this is like a worldwide phenomenon because a couple of months ago, we interviewed the chap in Romania that
Georgescu.
has been canceled by the Romanian government. It seems like the same thing is happening almost everywhere in the Western world. Same thing in France. Uh, and, and
Yes.
and for that matter, in the US with Trump. So I know you have to be optimistic, but it seems like perhaps because of the education system, the average person everywhere is a collectivist, is a statist. The trend has been against us.
You're right about that. But Trump started a revolution, a peaceful revolution, and now you have that in UK, in France, in Romania, and other countries. But you're right. And here in Canada, because of our parliamentary system, we don't have any proportionality in our electoral system, and it is more difficult for us to have our first candidate elected. But I can tell you, it will happen, and there's a trend now in Western countries, and that's why you have all these elites and establishments who are fighting against us, populists in different countries, because they're afraid of our ideas. And we know that we will win. It is just a question of time. So that I'm very positive and optimistic for our future. It may be at this election in Canada. If not, it will be at the next election. But we are ready, and more people must understand that we need to save the Western civilization, and that's the goal of the People's Party.
Well, you're quite correct. It is the larger question is Western civilization itself, which is being washed away. Is this the first time that you've run for office?
No. I worked in the private sector, in the financial sector for 19 years, and I decided to jump into politics in 2006. I was elected under the Conservative Party of Canada with Stephen Harper. He was the Prime Minister at that time. I was Industry Minister and Foreign Affairs Minister in 2006, 2007, 2008. And I had different positions in the Harper government. And as you may know, in 2015, Harper didn't win the election, and we had a leadership contest in Canada. And I didn't win with 49% of support. At that time, in 2017, Andrew Scheer won, and he became the leader of the Conservative Party. And I tried to work with him for 15 months after the leadership contest. But I had a very private and very good meeting with Andrew Scheer just before the general election in Canada in 2019. And I wanted him to take some of our ideas to put that in his electoral platform for the election of 2019. And Andrew Scheer was very honest, and he told me, Maxime, your ideas were very popular with the membership of the Conservative Party of Canada, but I'm running to be the Prime Minister, and your ideas are not popular with the general population. So I won't take any of your ideas for the general election in 2019. And that's why I left, and I said this party, the Conservative Party of Canada, is morally and intellectually corrupt. They don't promote conservative ideas when they are not that popular. And by doing that, they're giving credibility to the leftist narrative. So that's why, and now the Conservative Party is conservative in name only, like the Rhino in the US, the Republican in name only. They don't have the courage to speak about real conservative issues against the woke agenda, against the trans agenda. There's only two sexes. They don't want to speak about that. But we are in the middle of a cultural war and we need to do that war. But the Conservatives won't do it. And, for me, the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party of Canada are almost the same on the most important issues for the future of our country.
Well said, and I think you're 100% accurate. Now, how long has the Popular Party been in existence?
Yeah, we created the party in 2018, the People's Party. We had our first election in 2019. At that time, we had only 1.6% of the vote. And at the other election in 2021, 5% of the vote. And what I like, our vote is all across the country, Eastern Canada, Western Canada. It's great because we are a real national political party. But the challenge with that is our vote is not concentrated in one region. It may be a little bit more difficult to have our first candidate elected. But from our first election in 2019 to the second one for us in 2021, we almost tripled our score from 1.6 to 5. And for this election, I'm pretty optimistic that we can do very well and make history in Canada and having our first candidate elected in Parliament. And that will be the beginning of that common sense revolution in our country.
Well, this is fantastic to hear. Of course, you're fighting an uphill battle because Canada has always been much more left-leaning than the US has in general. So it's not going to be easy because, of course, in the United States, the Libertarian Party puts forward the same values that we're talking about, but they've never been very popular. But it seems like it might be different in Canada.
Yeah. In Canada, when Trump said in the negotiation with the new free trade agreement with Canada, US, and Mexico, and Trump said, he was trying to destabilize our leaders by saying, Canada can be the 51st state. But my answer to that is it is not serious because, as you know, the population in Canada is 40 million people, like California. And before the presidential election, they did a survey in Canada, and 65% of the population was ready to vote for Harris and the Democrat. So it will be not a good decision, being the 51st state, because that will be a new California in America. That won't help the Republican Party. So that was a joke. We need to fight for our sovereignty, but our enemy is not President Trump, it's our own government and these two establishment political parties.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's exactly what I've been saying as well.
What I want to go back to the secession idea, simply because, as I understand it, there's something in Canadian law that actually does make it legally possible and relatively easy for any province to secede if they chose to. Is that right?
Yeah, we had a decision by the Supreme Court of Canada after the referendum in Quebec in 1995, when the no for no separation won with 52%, something like that. So the Supreme Court said, yeah, if a province wants to separate, they will need to have a referendum in that province and asking a very simple question, direct question about the secession, and they will need to have a strong majority to do that. What is a strong majority? Is it more than 51%, 55? I don't know. But yeah, there's a way to do that. That's why I'm saying to Quebecers and Albertans, if you look at our platform, we want to give more autonomy to every province. In Alberta, they want to have their own police force. They want to have their own pension plan. They want to be able to exploit their own natural resources without any interference from Ottawa. And so there's a lot they want to have more autonomy. And, it's in line with the Constitution. Right now, the federal government is not respecting our Constitution by telling provinces what to do in their exclusive provincial responsibilities. So that's why you have that separatist movement that is starting in Alberta right now.
I also understand that because of all this trade war stuff that's been happening because of Trump, I learned for the first time that there isn't even free trade amongst the various provinces in Canada. Is that right? And what would you do about that?
Yeah, you're right about that. Here in Canada, you have Poliev, the conservative, and Carney, the liberal. They are saying to Trump and the US, we will do a trade war. They are engaged in a trade war against US by imposing counter tariffs. But when they're doing that, they're hurting our economy. It is Canadian consumers who are paying these tariffs, and the economy is not strong in Canada right now. We have high inflation, but actually these counter tariffs won't hurt American economy because they're 10 times bigger than us. We are the only political party that is saying no counter tariffs. We must reopen the free trade agreement right now and put everything on the table. And yes, to have a better and a more productive economy, after more than 150 years, this country has been created in 1867 on the basis to have an economic union in Canada, and we don't have that now. It's easier for businesses in New Brunswick to export their goods in the US than in Quebec, the province of Quebec. We need to have a real free trade in between provinces. We need to also lower taxes to businesses for them to be able to be more competitive. We need to abolish the capital gains tax. So having a more productive economy to be able to compete with the US and other countries. But right now, we don't have that economic union in Canada, and it's a big challenge.
Well, I remember when the Canadian dollar was worth more than the US dollar. It was worth $1.03, $1.04, and now it's about 70 cents. And the taxes in Canada are just brutal. I asked myself, how can a businessman start and run a business in Canada with all the taxes and regulations that you've got? Now, are most of those taxes and regulations provincial or federal when you get right down to it? Because you have VAT, you have sales tax, you've got provincial income tax.
Yes, you're right. Canadian businesses and Canadians are paying a lot of taxes. And just on the corporate income tax, we have the federal one and the provincial one. If you put the two together, the corporate income tax for a corporation in Canada is 26%. And the corporate income tax for a business in US, 24%. And Trump said that he will lower that. That's why, our businesses, they are not competitive, and the investment in Canada are leaving our country to go in other countries. We need to attract more investment, and the only way to do that is to have a flat tax on business. That is our proposal on 15%. So our businesses will be able to keep more of their profit. They will be able to reinvest to be more productive. And so that's the only way. But there's no discussion in between the conservatives and the liberals about that. They're okay with the statu quo, but that is hurting our economy and the productivity of our economy.
Well, and that's right. And the individual Canadian as well is paying a lot more tax than the average American does. But where does that money go? Is it the welfare system that's really killing Canada? Because in the US, we spend about $1 trillion per year for the US military, but the Canadian military is tiny. So what is it? Mostly welfare in Canada? Is that where it goes?
Yes, absolutely. For example, our healthcare system is a socialist system, managed and by the government, and so you don't have any choice. Everybody has a public insurance. That's good, but there's no competition. Our system must change. We are spending a lot of money in healthcare, and there's no way to for that system to be better. There's a big waiting list in Canada for surgeries. If you compare that with other systems in Europe, we need to have more competition. The best system for us will be, a mixed system. Everybody can have a public insurance, but the best will be for them to choose if they want to go to a private hospital or a public one, having competition in the system. We don't have that. And in Europe, in Sweden, in Germany, they have more competition and they're spending less money on healthcare than here in Canada. So we need to do bold reform like that. Absolutely. In Canada, at the provincial level and at the federal level, the government is more socialist, and they are creating programs for Canadians, but we don't have that money. That's why we have a huge deficit and a huge debt. Just for example, under the Trudeau government, the Trudeau when he was prime minister was able to double our debt that we accumulated over 148 years, and he doubled that in 9 years. Our debt was $600 billion when Trudeau became elected, and 9 years later, our debt now, our national debt is $1,200 billion, and we still have a huge deficit. So that's why, the federal government is huge, spending money that we don't have, and, it's very difficult for the private sector to create wealth in this country.
Well,
It
I
seems
think
like-
it's heroic what you're doing, but you have an uphill battle.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but I love his optimism, Doug. I love it. Any people like that who can see the future and are working toward it despite the obstacles. I mean, I love it. I mean, honestly, neither Doug or I are like this. We're kind of, we kind of get said, oh, we can't control the state. The state's going to do bad things. Let's just go somewhere else. But the truth is the world does need people who are optimistic and have a vision for the future and are pushing to drive it forward. And I certainly appreciate seeing that in you. And all the things you say sound like they would be very popular, except for the people who are receiving welfare benefits. If somehow, I can understand how that constituency, if they're worried they're going to miss out on welfare benefits, public transfer payments that they currently receive. Is that the way you're portrayed in the media, that you're going to, that's what they do in the US. They say they're going to cut your Social Security. Is that the same kind of a tax they use on you?
No, we don't have any attack because it's like we don't exist for the mainstream media. They don't want to talk about our platform. But speaking about that, in our platform, we can and we will balance our budget in 1 year. The deficit of this year in Canada will be about $50 billion. And we are able to balance the budget by cutting spending without affecting Canadians. For example, we can cut foreign aid, save $10 billion there. We can cut corporate welfare, all the subsidies that the federal government is giving to corporations. We can save another $25 billion there. And that's why with that, we'll be able to have a flat tax on business and also abolishing the capital gains tax, like I said before. And also, I spoke about $2 billion. That's the money that the federal government is giving to the mainstream media. And also, you have in Canada a redistribution of wealth from rich provinces to poor provinces. And the federal government is giving $26 billion a year to that. But we need to stop that, because with that formula and that redistribution of wealth, there's no incentive for poor provinces to develop their own natural resources. For example, there's a moratorium on the exploitation of shale gas in Quebec, because if they do that, they will be richer and they will receive less money from the equalization payments. And our goal is to give to poor provinces the right incentive for them to be more, pro free markets and develop their own natural resources. We can cut half of that money, so saving another $13 billion. So everything, we can balance the budget in 1 year, if we are serious. And that's our proposal, and it's very well received. And after that, the second year, with all the surplus and the economic growth, we will take that money, 100% of that money, to lower taxes to Canadians. That's a nice economic plan, a realistic one. But for Poilievre, the fake conservative, is not speaking about that. And the Liberals, we won't see the day where they will end this deficit. Actually, during the campaign right now, Poilievre, is giving a lot of money and promises to Canadians without cutting anything. He won't balance the budget, and that's why we will be in a big recession if we don't do anything in Canada soon.
I just did some Googling. Tell me if these numbers are right. It said that in 2024, the government of Canada raised a total of 82.5 billion in corporate income tax revenues. So, and then it gives out 25 billion of that in welfare to corporations.
Yeah, subsidies, big subsidies. Actually, the federal government, the subsidies are going also to the green industry. But because, as you know, we signed the Paris Accord, and for Poilievre and Carney, CO2 is a pollutant. It's very dangerous. But as you know, CO2 is a gas essential for life. We need more CO2, but they'll do everything to achieve the Paris Accord. And they won't impose a carbon tax on Canadians, but they will impose more taxes and give more subsidies to the green industry. We will cut all that and won't participate in the Paris Accord. But that's why the Conservative and the Liberals are the same on these issues.
So the Conservative also supports these. He believes that carbon is a problem. He has that same.
Yes, you're right. Actually, the Conservative wanted to have an election on the carbon tax. They wanted to eliminate the carbon tax. That's still in their program. But the Liberals said, because the carbon tax is not that popular, so the Liberals said, we will also axe the tax and abolish that tax. And now the Conservatives are saying, we must stay in the Paris Accord, but we must spend billions of dollars to capture CO2 with a new technology called carbon capture, to capture the CO2 and put it in the ground. That's their proposal. And we don't want to do that. We will withdraw from the Paris Accord. And there's a natural technology to capture CO2. It is called plants, because CO2 is food for plants. But they're spending billions of dollars to do that, the Conservatives and the Liberals.
That's
No,
insane.
it's actually quite insane. How are you going to do on a provincial level? Does the People's Party have a lot of strength in the provinces for their legislatures?
Good question. No, because we are a young and new populist party. We need to put all our energy to build this party all across the country at the federal level. We don't have a People's Party of Ontario, for example, of a People's Party of Alberta in different provinces. But some of our people wants to do that, and I'm not against it. But our priority is to build that party all across the country, to be ready at every election and to be ready for this one in 2 weeks. So we don't have an intention to start a provincial party, but I know that some of our members are looking for that. And if they have the energy to do that, I'm not against it.
Do you have candidates in every election and up for every spot right now?
Yeah, in Canada, there's 343 seats in Parliament, so 343 ridings, and we had about a little bit more than 300 candidates. So we don't have a full slate, actually, but we are almost there. I believe that at the last election we had a little bit fewer candidates, but now we have more. So our goal, and we have more candidates than the Green Party or all these other, except the Conservatives and the Liberal. But, we have people ready to work and to fight for us all across the country. But we won't have a full slate at this elections. We are almost there.
Well, you know what I like about talking with you, Maxime, is that you're approaching this, it seems to me, from a philosophical point of view. In other words, the People's Party is not just another party with some good ideas and some bad ideas. It seems to me that you really are a libertarian that wants to change the hearts and minds of the people towards more freedom and less statism. And that's very unusual in a political party anywhere.
Yeah, you have a point there. And yes, because, we created that party based on ideas. And, at every election, the 2019, 2021, and this election, they're out there with the same platform. We don't do any polling. We don't do any focus group. We are telling Canadians the truth based on facts with reason. And at every election, it's the same platform. We want to win the battle of ideas. And so our candidates are there. I know what to do to be elected tomorrow. I just have to tell what people want to hear today. But no, our role is to educate and inform Canadians and changing the public opinion on our side. And you cannot do that in one election. And our candidates understand that. So we are doing politics differently because we have strong ideas and we are always speaking about our ideas with passion and conviction. And that's why, we are growing step by step and our time will come.
And this worked, of course, in Argentina, just across the Plate River from where we are. Milei, as I'm sure you're aware, came out of nowhere. And he did it by being very forthright and not compromising on any principles at all. And it seems to me that he's the best comparison to what you're doing in Canada. It's Milei in Argentina, not Trump in the US.
Yeah, or Ron Paul during his run. Now, obviously it wasn't very successful as a candidate, but the truth is that he was the only person in that campaign that wasn't morally and intellectually corrupt.
Yeah,
and that's what all the other leaders are now, it seems.
yes, and I had the opportunity to have a dinner with Ron Paul when I was a minister, and he's a great guy, always fighting for the right ideas. And yes, we are doing that here in Canada. We know that if an idea is not that popular, we will speak about it and it will become more and more popular. For example, when I started to speak about controlling mass immigration in 2019, that was the first time that a political party was saying fewer immigrants. At that time, we had a proposal to have 150,000 immigrants a year maximum. And, they were calling me racist and xenophobe and things like that because we wanted to have that debate. But now, 6 years later, with that mass immigration, nobody is able to throw names at us because we were right at that time. And now the population is on our side, but the mainstream media and mainstream political parties don't want to speak about that. But yes, we are changing the public opinion step by step. And it's not because one of our ideas is not that popular today that we won't speak about it. On the opposite, we will speak about it and we will grow like that. Yes, you're right. It's the only way to do politics for me. And it's new because we are offering a new and another alternative to Canadians with our proposal. And I believe that our time will come like in other countries, like you just said.
As Doug was brought up education earlier and how that's kind of a problem in the way that schools have indoctrinated people. It says what they've done, I think, is they've stripped away morality and intellectual rigor. And so people are just kind of transactional, or they're going, do I win? Do I get something more for me if I make this decision or less for me when they're making their political decisions? But I think, especially among young people, I see this in my own kids, I have teenagers, is that they want something that is true. They want something that, that transcends, something transactional. They want something that is not morally or intellectually corrupt. And I think eventually, if it'd be great if you got on the mainstream media and you got to tell your story that way instead of with, our little audience. But I think you'd win a ton of people over if they could just hear these philosophical anchors. because this is the truth and this is the way that everyone can win.
You're right about that, about the future and the youth in our country. I told you at the last election, we have 5% of the vote on average all across the country. But when the young male, 18 to 35 years old, we were at 10% of support. So that's great. And here in Alberta, we had 10% average in that province at the last election. There are more, as you know, free markets and conservatives in Alberta. So yeah, the future is there. We just need to be out there. And that's why I'm very pleased to have that opportunity to be with you, to speak about our platform, to be able to speak to your Canadian audience and American one also.
And
there is cause for optimism because Milei in Argentina, a major source of his support was young people who were tired of being taxed for nothing and having no opportunities. So actually, the future would be with you. How are you doing with young people? Do we know?
Yeah, so I'm doing a lot of podcasts and rallies with them, and you're right. For a young couple in Canada right now, it is very difficult to buy a house. The affordability is not there, and we are telling them the government won't save you, and they understand that. So that's why we have a lot of support, and it's and we have also young candidates that are running with us, and they're there, they're ready to fight. So that's why I believe that we have a great future. It may take a couple of months, but anyway, we are there for that fight.
Well,
Doug, this was also true
we're
of
on
Ron
your
Paul.
side. Yeah, if there's any way we can help, I think we will.
Yeah, absolutely. We love what you're doing, and we love what we weren't sure exactly what we were going to hear today. We both did some research on you to understand more about what you stand for. I spent all morning listening to different interviews that you've done, and honestly, I couldn't find anything that I disagreed with, which is rare.
Yeah, because I believe that you agree with our principles, individual freedom and personal responsibility. So that these are the base, the principles of the foundation of our party. So that's why, and and also there's 40% of Canadians who didn't vote at the last election, and for us that's huge. If these people are not voting, it's because they're telling establishment politicians, we don't believe in you. You're the same. So that's a nice clientele for us. If we have half of them who are coming and vote at this election, we'll be able to win easily.
An excellent point. The average person is fed up with government the way it is.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that you win, Maxime. I think you're great.
Yeah, I think
Thank
so
you.
too. I totally endorse you. And I think if anybody out there who's like me and has basically been discouraged with the voting system and feels like there's no point in voting, I think in this is a special case. And if nothing else, to send a message to the, I did this, the only time I've ever voted in a presidential election, I did it for Ron Paul. And there was a lot of young people also in that case that were very enthusiastic about Ron Paul because he was a man of principle and character. And you seem to be exactly the same. So if you're on the fence about voting or not, make sure you get out there and vote for Maxime.
Thank
right.
you, guys. Thank you very much. And, I hope we'll be able to stay in touch. I'll let you know what will be the result in 2 weeks. But, it's a fight, and you're doing that also by, having your podcast. And, it's a challenging time, but at the same time, it can be a great time.
I agree with you. We wish you a lot of luck and safe travels. I know you're basically going all over Canada at the last minute. You're trying to stir up votes wherever you can. So good luck with all that. And certainly we'd love to keep in touch and have you on again in the future.
Thank you again. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
What'd you think, Doug?
One thing I liked about it was the fact that if his car was going a lot faster than the stream of traffic, which tells me two things. He, he's alive. He doesn't follow the rules, and he's trying to get somewhere in a hurry. So all these things are good.
He's trying to get shit done, and
Yeah,
he's got places to
exactly.
be. Yeah, I mean, did you hear anything you disagreed with?
Uh, he was a little bit wishy-washy when it came to the national healthcare system in Canada.
Yeah,
It's ought to
it's
be abolished and totally privatized.
well,
But
he did say he wanted to at least institute competition, which is of course the right answer, but you know, he wasn't a complete like a chainsaw to the state kind of guy.
yeah, and it would really be tough in Canada, which it's tough in the US, but Canada's got a much more leftist orientation, as he pointed out, than the US does. So, yeah, I guess he's got to spoon feed them these ideas to some
Yes, he's
degree.
got it. Yeah, I mean, he's pretty radical on a lot of things by comparison to these other guys, you know. He's
Yeah.
against all the LGBTQ trans stuff, against all these the foreign aid. He's against the war in Ukraine, wants to totally cut that off. He's against the COVID regime. I mean,
Global warming, I mean, all of the things. It's, yeah, it's a whole panoply of things. So, look, the truth is that I didn't know that he existed before this interview. So there's got to be a lot of people like me because I probably pay more attention to uh, politics, international politics, than most people do. And I didn't know he existed because he's been cut off from basically
yeah,
communication
they've
by the
done an
state.
excellent job of making it seem like he doesn't exist. I remember him from the COVID hysteria. I remember that he was like the one person saying this isn't a good idea. You know, you can't make this stuff mandatory. But since then, yeah, up until this morning when I was doing research, didn't see anything about him. I didn't know he was running.
Yeah.
I didn't know there was a party. I didn't know he was leading a new party. I had no idea.
Well, I'm so happy to have discovered another cause for optimism because I prefer to be optimistic as opposed to gloom and doomy.
Yeah, you know, a couple times you brought up, you know, you're fighting a lost cause kind of stuff with him, you know, and you're like, it's admirable, but it's kind of a lost cause. But man, we definitely need people like that. You know, we really do. We need people
Yeah.
who are not giving up. And I mean, you know, not and I, of course, you know, we're not giving up, but on our we still, you know, it's not like we're rolling over in our, you know, giving up on our own. We focus just on our own lives and trying to make good in our lives. But I think, you know, it is, you know, he's just so connected to politics because of his, you know, lifetime experience and all that. So for him, this is his way of personally doing that, you know, just like you would do by talking about good ideas on this podcast and in your books. And it's just his form of it. And he's got a lot of energy. He shows well.
Yep.
You know, and he's got great ideas and he believes in, he has a philosophical foundation, which is like the rarest thing on earth these days.
Especially for anybody that's actively involved in politics. And, you know, uh, he made one point that I thought was excellent. It's that 40% of Canadians don't vote. Now, why might that be? Um, well, one reason for it might be that they're so fed up that they just don't want to get involved in it. And I go back and forth on the subject of voting, believe it or not. And I say this as a doctrinaire anarchist who doesn't believe in the government or voting. It's that Harry Brown, uh, when he ran for president twice on the libertarian ticket in the US, uh, I was the largest single donor to his campaign. Unbelievable to me that I would have been giving money for a political campaign. But it's because Harry was out there saying things on a national platform that nobody else was saying. And people have to hear these things before they can believe them.
Exactly.
I think that Maxime may serve that purpose, if nothing else.
I agree. And some of my very close friends were significant, maybe the biggest contributors to Ron Paul's campaign. And I remember talking to them about it and saying, it's hopeless. I was at the Iowa caucuses. I caucused for him. You have to actually get together and you go and stand in different parts of the gymnasium, and it was sad. 2% of us, in there. And I couldn't believe it. There was like but I was telling them it seemed so hopeless. And but they had this view that no, you got to support good ideas. You have to support good ideas. And if you don't support good ideas, then the good ideas will die. And, and then earlier this year, they put in the meme of end the Fed. It exists because of Ron Paul. And that exists because of my friends who believe so strongly in Ron's values that they financed him at, great expense to them personally. So, there is something to it. Now, when you get the Republican, if your choices are between Carney and Pierre Poilievre, or however you say his name, I understand why you wouldn't want to vote or support him, because who cares, really? Neither one of these are, admirable people, from at least to the way that they're described by Maxime.
I think you've got a choice between an actual borderline communist in Carney and a doctrinaire socialist in the case of Poilievre.
Yeah, exactly. So there's no choice. So stay home. Why vote? But you don't have to stay home. You can go vote for someone else. And it's 36% of Americans don't vote. Also, similar numbers. And you and I were in that category last year. So
yeah.
But what can you say? So anyway, well, best of luck to him. I don't know if obviously, I don't think his party will win since no one knows they exist. But the fact he's got a bunch of people on the ballot, maybe they get a seat. They have one person there in Parliament that just makes a lot of noise. That can help.
Yeah, and I learned something new today because I didn't know that he existed before this podcast. So it's nice to learn something from your own podcast.
Yeah, no kidding. I agree. All right. Okay. I think we'll wrap it up there, Doug. Any other last words on Maxime?
No, we'll talk Friday.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Thank you very much.